Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Kim with K Montes Art Studio, and today we have another paint and chat with me. This is last week's painting on the same Fabriano acrylical paper and aquarello paper actually. And this paper is slowly becoming one of my favorites. I tore that piece right there, but the good thing about it is that it only tore in the back and it did not tear in the front, so that was a lucky call. But just be mindful when tearing from your block paper. So here it is, the Aquarello Artistico 100% cotton paper. And then I have my Pentel water brushes, which I'm going to be using a water container this time. I do enjoy using just the water brush sometimes, but having that extra water there really helps. This is my Karatake Gansai Tambi watercolor pan in the Art Nouveau set. I really love this collection. This is probably one of my favorite collections of colors, and just having all the colors that I use in one area is very efficient for me. The one thing I don't necessarily love about these particular watercolors is the shine that sometimes gets left behind, but that's just a preference base. There is a way of kind of removing that shine. I'll talk about that later. So I moisten my watercolor palette and let that saturate, and I am going to pull up an image from Unsplash. So this image is a royalty-free image, and I thought it'd be perfect to kind of capture some of the fall feeling that is now going to be happening in November. So this one's a super exciting image because I'm trying to acquire some more I would say realistic, representational, that's a word, more representational imagery in this landscape, which I typically don't do. And I just went over that sketch super quickly to kind of just get into the painting. So I got the blobs in as best as I could, and I pretty much just used the paint to acquire the imagery to its liking. So I had an excellent question in one of my videos a couple weeks ago, and they were asking, how do I acquire the likeness of a landscape? Usually I kind of reference my memory, but because I've been doing these landscapes for years now, I'm able to understand the anatomy of the landscape, same way that I'm able to understand the anatomy of a human body when I'm painting figures without even looking at a figure. So honestly, what it really comes down to is practice. But if you're not there yet, I would say reference photos are absolutely key if you cannot be in a plein air painting situation. So find a simple photo like the one that I just showed. Feel free to pause at any point in that sketching moment and reference that photo, since it is a royalty-free photo. And you can understand the foreground, middle ground, and the background in that particular photo. Starting with photos like that really helped me a whole lot, and capturing the photo yourself so that you can really remember what you saw in that moment is what had been super helpful for me. So I captured this photo, I broke it down, as you may have noticed, right down the middle, according to the segment of that image, and I separated it from grass, trees, and then the mountains, and I was able to sort of sketch in just quick little blobs. It doesn't have to be perfect, because that's the good thing about landscapes, that it's not human-like, so people are going to interpret it regardless as some sort of organic, abstract, representational landscape, however you decide to paint it. So that's the good thing about painting landscapes, is that no matter what it turns out to look like, it most likely, if you're intending for it to look like a landscape, it will most likely look like a landscape. Now, when you're dealing with figures and people, because people like to see resemblance in other things or find faces in objects and things like that, that's when representation becomes a little bit more crucial, which is part of the reason why I stay away from face painting and figures, I should say portraits, because acquiring that similarity really helps a person to relate to that image. So that's kind of it. That's really how I acquire some of my landscapes. So let's talk about failure a bit. Yeah, so as you may have known, I had been taking my exam last week, which is part of the reason why I didn't post a video last week, and I failed it, unfortunately. But I have to say that I passed in other ways. So seeing yourself face some failures doesn't mean, at least to me, doesn't mean that I am a failure. I failed this test, and I think that I was able to understand a lot of things about the test itself, the idea of taking this test as a person with disabilities, being in a private room, helped me to understand how to take the test for the second time, and all of those sort of technical things that I wasn't too sure about. So that was nice. I also think that reflecting back on a lot of my failures helped me to realize that it is okay to come to a point where things don't have to be perfect all the time. So when you're dealing with failure, whether that's in your art or an exam or life or whatever the case may be, I think of it as a lesson learned, right? What are the things that you learned from that? What can you do differently for the next time around? Because a lot of the times we fail and we give up. And that's exactly what I had been doing with previous exams. And I'm using exams as an example because I've taken a lot of certification exams and I failed a lot of times. But what I did wrong was not try again. I never tried to take some of those exams again. And I think this time around, I'm going to prepare mentally and also stress less. I think that was a big issue of mine. Another thing is the way I was teaching myself and studying. I have to study a specific way because I am a person with disabilities and dyslexia and all of that. I have to be able to kind of teach myself, and I'd been trying to memorize things in a particular way, but that doesn't really work for me, and unfortunately it showed. But that's not to say that I did a terrible job. So to be honest, the results of the test were ever so slightly off, in that had I had studied one section of the exam, there were 7 sections, a little bit better, so that one particular section was not in my study book. And I didn't realize that. It was in my chapters, it was in my big textbook, but when I purchased the question practice quiz book, that one section was not in that book. And I never referenced my textbook after a certain point, which is where I went wrong. But I always feel, well, I felt at that moment that if I had that one section, I would have tipped over and got those extra 100 points that I needed to pass. But it's fine. I know where I went wrong, and I know what I have to do for the second time around. So how can we relate this back to art? So many ways, so many ties to kind of find yourself in a position of succeeding and being okay with your failures. Like I failed so many times in my art career, and having to do things again and figuring out how to start this YouTube thing again 7 years later, missing the height of the beginning of social media in 2016. You know, sometimes you have some regrets in those aspects, but I mean, sometimes things happen for a reason. So when I first started my YouTube career, it sounds weird to say because I never thought about that. But when I first started, I was all over the place. I think I mentioned this a couple of times, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And then when I finally made one art video in my old YouTube page, it clicked in my head that that's what I wanted to do. But I never came back to it. I dropped the YouTube thing, and 7 years later, I came back to it. 7 or 8, I think now. And I've been consistent with it. Some other places that I failed at, believe it or not, I failed the 3rd grade. I was in the 3rd grade and I did not pass my spelling or reading class. And of course, the reasons why were because I had dyslexia, but nobody knew. The teacher didn't know, I wasn't diagnosed properly, and I didn't have the proper resources. So I was failing every single test because of that. And it kind of sucked. But I went home, told my mom, and my mom was like, it's okay, we can do it again. And I was really, really kind of almost relieved that I wasn't going to be in trouble. But, you know, sometimes you have to take a second chance at things. And my 2nd, 3rd grade was the best. I remember things just improved after that. Then I went on to 4th grade, and I was the star student of my class. Of course, I still struggled with spelling and reading, but I was able to excel in a lot of other areas. So that was really great. So, but I mean, look at me now. I'm a teacher. I do a bunch of things with my students, especially with my students with disabilities. I try to really focus on them and pay attention to their needs. So failures do help you to turn things around. And if you want to think about it in a way of seasonal changes, if you think about fall and how leaves change and fall down, and trees transition into sort of hibernating sticks in the woods, you can think of it in that way, that you're ultimately not failing, but you're going through a change within seasons. So although things may not have gone as planned, you can rethink the way you do certain things. So whether that's creating a schedule, working through your study habits, thinking about what could have gone better, and really truly not beating yourself up for that failure. When I came home after my exam, I was really avoiding crying, and I was like, okay, it's okay. I was mentally prepared to accept either results, which helped me a whole lot. And I was like, if I fail, I can take it over. So I was prepared to do that. And that helped me to kind of prevent myself from spiraling. But at the very end, at night, I cried. I just had to let it out and just be okay with like being sad. And there's nothing wrong with being sad. I think sometimes you need that moment of sadness to be able to move forward with your emotions of that specific situation and let the clouds kind of pass by and then have a dance party with Beyonce. Because that's exactly what I did right afterwards. I was so happy that the sort of rally that was going on happened that same day, and I put on the music that they were playing and I just danced the night away. So that was fun. So jumping back into this painting here, we're pretty far along into the process, and as you can see, I broke down the foreground into several different green shades, and I focused on the image a lot. I referenced the image constantly so that I can capture some of the shade and shadow. And I wanted to be able to let some of the colors bleed into each other, capturing some of the non-existing colors that are there. And what I mean by that are like the blues, the browns that you don't really necessarily notice right away, some of the yellows, and that's kind of that's acquired with layering. So this particular moment right here, you can see that I'm just playing around with the brush, and this is where some of my stylized portion comes into play, where I'm assuming it to be a certain brush stroke, if you want to say that, and this helps to pop some of the saturated colors. Believe it or not, from what I've noticed, is having just a little bit of darker saturated shade and shadow helps to bounce off some of those vibrant colors, especially because this particular paper is very absorbent and it is a very thirsty paper. But you can see that this particular paint, when you're using it on another piece of paper that is not 100% cotton, or somewhat some other solvents are in the paper, it does become shiny. There were a couple segments within the yellow side on the left side of the trees that you see in that green area. I'm always giving you guys directions to follow when looking at my paintings. I don't even know if it works. But on the left side, where you see that little yellow patch, that side was a little bit shiny. And it was because I went in pretty saturated. So here I'm diving into the mountains. And what I love about this paint is that I can create any color. Like I made an Indian red color. An Indian red color is pretty hard to make, but that's so close to the Indian red that I have in Daniel Smith. I was really impressed with this color that I made. I have no idea how I made it, but I made it. I think I used some of the 2 reds off to the top right. So that would be the Rose Madden, I think it's called, deep. And the Cadmium Scarlet with a little bit of the turquoise blue and some of the green. But I could be wrong. I don't know. It's very clay-like, that color. So that was nice that I was able to create that. And you can also be creative with your colors. Right now, I'm using a lot of the representational colors of the image and being pretty exact about some of the colors that are represented in this image. But if you don't know, for those that do know, I should say, you've probably seen a lot of bright colors in my landscapes, like pinks and blues and purples and colors that you don't see in nature in these particular areas. And once you get to the point of acquiring the landscape shapes and blobs and things like that, then you can take it up a notch and start adding some fun, vibrant colors. That's how I did things. So a lot of my earlier paintings when I was in watercolor were very realistic. I soon realized that I didn't like that because I don't know why. I mean, they were good, but it wasn't impressive to me. I wanted to be able to find my own voice within the watercolor world. And this representational style of painting is a little bit more acceptable for me. I would say for me and how I want. Not to say that realistic and representational works from others aren't beautiful, but for me, I wanted to have my own voice and have my own style when I'm working in this manner. And it just feels much more comfortable for me. I'm not stressed, I'm not tense. For those that do end up doing like realistic paintings, I've noticed from my experience that they do oftentimes seem a little bit more uptight about the painting, unless if you're like extremely skilled and you can do it without hesitation. But doing realistic paintings for me is oftentimes stressful, and that's not how I perceive art to be. I don't want to be stressed. I don't want to leave my session or my station, my workroom or studio stressed and uptight with my shoulders up to my ears and my hand is cramping. I don't like that feeling because it does tend to defeat the purpose of the art session. Very subtle pain happened during this art session, but I did take a break. And that's because I was just ever so slightly uptight. But again, I wanted to intentionally be representational and not realistic. So to say the least, I don't do this style very often, but when I do, it's with a purpose, and I hope that you liked it. So as we approach the end, let me know what you think of failure, of realism versus representational. What is your style of art? Do you think that I should kind of do more of these? I know I keep hearing that in the comments. So if you really do enjoy these chat and paints, definitely let me know, because this is pretty fun for me. I love going over topics. It's almost like having a mini podcast while I'm chatting and painting with you guys. So yeah, let me know. So I leave the very best for last, and that's the sky. Some of my favorite things to do is sky. Sky work is so liberating and very freeing for me. I start off with a light wash of stain of ultramarine blue and a little bit of whatever was left over on my brush, honestly, with a slight bit of dirty water. And that helped me to stain the paper. And I wet the paper pretty saturated, and you can see how it starts to bleed a bit, leaving some room for moving the water around and being able to let the clouds bloom naturally. I was creating a similar feel to a blue sky with ever so slightly light bloomy clouds, and I just let that be. I added a couple more details. Oh, this is the portion where I realized how shiny that little spot was. I added a couple more details, and then I just let things be the way it was. So let me know what you think in the comments below. If you really enjoy these paints and chats, as I mentioned earlier, what would you like to see for the next video? Do you want to continue seeing landscapes? Maybe we can jump into some florals or some architectural views. I can get a little bit bigger now that I have some more time on my hands, but I'm really thankful for all of my new subscribers. Thanks for watching, thanks for liking, and I will see you in the next one.